My Hero Academia Chapter 393, titled A Girl's Ego, begins with a flashback of the League of Villains. Based on the trash around them, it looks like this was before or towards the beginning of the My Villain Academia arc. Back then, the League was having money issues, so they were bumming it out in random abandoned places. At this time, Twice came to the realization that Toga hadn't yet decided on a villain name. Mr. Compress, who was toying with his prosthetic arm, was aware of the same thing. This prompted Spinner to chime in by saying that Toga and Shigaraki were the only ones who hadn't chosen villain names, which I'd argue isn't exactly true. Maybe he didn't decide on it of his own volition, but Shigaraki isn't his real name. Shimura Tenko is. Shigaraki Tomura was the moniker he had received from All For One. The Tomura bit was derived from the words to mourn, while Shigaraki is All For One's last name. Then again, it's not like Shigaraki remembered his own history at this point. Those terrible memories only returned to him while he was fighting Redestro. Twice, who was smoking a cigarette through his mask, was still mentally split at the time. One moment, he was telling her to choose one. In the next, he was telling her she didn't need one at all. Ultimately, the decision was Toga's to make. Shaking her head, she exclaimed that she didn't want to make one. This invited the input of the other League members. Mr. Compress argued that having a villain name was all too helpful for building a reputation. As quite the showman himself and a descendant of the infamous peerless thief Oji Harima, it makes total sense why he'd feel this way. Spinner's name suggestion was pretty similar to most of the ideas I've seen floating around online for her. Something along the lines of relating herself to a vampire. Twice, on the other hand, was thinking that something a bit more cutesy would be more fitting. Something related to bloody kisses or Pikachu. The second one is definitely really silly, but honestly kinda clever. Whenever Toga is sucking blood, she tends to make the sound chew. That, combined with her often blushing red cheeks, mostly cute demeanor, and blonde hair, made for quite the seemingly Pokemon-inspired assortment of traits. And considering Horikoshi made the staff of Central Hospital be a bunch of Mario characters, and even has Sonic the Hedgehog running around as a hero, I wouldn't put it past him to have used Pikachu as a reference when creating Toga. And if that's the case, I feel like we need to look at Uraraka a bit differently too. Because if Toga is Pikachu, then Uraraka is probably Kirby or something. She's cute and innocent looking, but can also get really serious and is low-key really powerful. Her primary color is pink, she has pink cheek marks on her face, big old boots, and can float up into the air. So what do you guys think? Are we onto something here? Toga refused all other suggestions adamantly. Dabi chimed in like the brooding cool guy that he is, calling all their ideas lame. To him, those sorts of names were just corny holdovers from before quirks ever even existed. They would only serve to pander to the masses. Mr. Compress pointed out Dabi's hypocrisy as someone with a villain name too. After all, they still didn't know Dabi's real name at this point. Shigaraki would then provide them all with a history lesson that I'm sure he gained from his master All For One. In the past, the line that separated heroes and villains was far more blurry. According to one theory, because people didn't know the identity of their enemies, they made up fitting names for them. From then on, people picked up code names for themselves. What's interesting is that this is just a theory. It's considered a theory since the history of this world is so shrouded thanks to All For One's reign of terror. I would honestly love to see more historical events from this world, even if it's not exactly from the main story. We've been told that quirks have only gotten more complex with the passage of time and such, but then again, all of Deku's quirks are old, and they're some of the coolest ones in the series. Sure, they may be supercharged by being a part of One For All, but I'm not so sure that powers being more simple is really a bad thing. There's also the fact that All For One slaughtered anyone with a cool quirk back then. He of course stole plenty of them, but you have to remember that he tends to prefer simple ones since they don't take much effort to use effectively. And the people with the strongest quirks tend to have the strongest personalities, which would be a huge issue for him since he also grabs a vestige of a person's spirit along with their quirk. Secret identities were like masks that helped heroes and villains both survive. Although these days, at least for heroes, secret identities are a thing of the past. Over time, heroes and villains became symbols. It was as if the real world was imitating the world of superhero comic books, which definitely confirms that these words were just an echo from All For One, since Shigaraki was born way after comic books fell off. Plus, All For One loves to mention the comic book he and his brother Yoichi used to read. Shigaraki felt like he didn't need that sort of thing. With that being said, he would think to himself while smiling that he does think they're pretty cool though. And to me, that right there is the Tenko aspect of his mentality. let's not forget that despite being on opposite sides, Shigaraki is a fan of Eraserhead. Just then, Toga suddenly leapt out of her seat with delight. She'd expressed that this was the very reason she had joined the League of Villains. Life was just way too hard. With a somewhat sinister, yet oddly pure smile on her face, Toga would let it be known that she would live her life true to herself as the one and only Himiko Toga. In the present, a Toga Twice hybrid of sorts was in the middle of stabbing Uraraka in the stomach with her knife while suspended in the air. She'd tell the hero not to project her standards onto her, and that she doesn't care to be pitied. Uraraka gritted her teeth against the pain. Toga was shocked to see the young hero's resilience. Uraraka grabbed hold of the villain while shifting her momentum with her boots. Uraraka let Toga know that she wasn't trying to pity her at all. She launched Toga, causing her to spiral. The bloodthirsty villain thought to herself that she'd been touched by Uraraka's quirk. But at the moment, floating doesn't put her at risk of dying thanks to the cushy mound of clones she has below. Toga's anger continued to build. She'd exclaim that Uraraka could use whatever pretty words she wanted to. At the end of the day, she believed that this girl was trying to lock her up so that she'd be executed for her crimes. And if that wasn't the case, she was sure that Uraraka would just kill her like they killed twice. Now unraveling even further, Toga shouted out that win or lose, live or die, this was a battle for survival at the end of the day. Uraraka was struggling to maintain her consciousness at this point, but said that what Toga believed her intentions to be were how most people would see it. Toga concluded that if it wasn't pity, then it could only be ego. And if that's the case, then Toga would ensure that Uraraka dies here. This is Sad Man's Legion. No one on the battlefield was safe from the onslaught. This destructive panel all but confirms the safety of characters like Pixie Bob and Tiger, which is kind of ridiculous given the sheer number of these adult male clones all bearing their weight down on their opponents. And that's all before you consider the fact that they are all armed with knives and reinforced tape measures. Frankly, there's no reason that any of the characters presented on this page should be alive at this point. In fact, there are so many clones here that they're almost completely covering an entire cityscape. They are at a higher elevation than the tallest skyscrapers. Aside from extreme cases like the Tokyo Skytree, the maximum height that a skyscraper can be in Japan is 255 meters or 836 feet. This is on account of earthquake concerns. To further put that into perspective, Gigantomachia's maximum height is 82 feet. At this scale, it would be better to be stomped on by Machia than be in the middle of this. Surviving this onslaught is kind of silly. The news reporter that was flying overhead expressed that there's never been anything like this before. Again, it said that with the passage of generations, quirks are destined to grow stronger and become even harder to control. She would say that the quirk singularity doomsday theory had been whispered about for countless years. But this is the day. It is finally happening today. This is interesting because really, a living twice would be several times worse than this. Remember that Toga isn't able to make quirk viable clones of Dabi or Shigaraki to wreak havoc. All things considered, this is a tame version. Also, we can't exactly call this the singularity, since Toga, despite her manic state, is still very much in control of her power here. If you want to see the singularity, let's go back to the Deku vs Shigaraki fight. Side note, next month will be a year since Bakugo died. Uraraka would struggle to tell her opponent that a girl and her feelings can change the world. Toga at this point has her entire face exposed. Thematically, this is for the sake of having the fan favorite character's appearance as visible as possible. Canonically, this could be an indication of Twice's blood running out, placing a visual time limit on how long this rampage can go on. Toga demanded that her infinite army of clones attack and crush Uraraka. Uraraka somehow used her gunhead martial arts to repel each and every one of them. A feat that is a bit difficult to fathom considering their sheer numbers and the fact that we are looking at doubles of Twice, Sue, Toga, and Uraraka herself, all of which being some of the most acrobatic characters in the series. And this is all while suffering from a stab wound to the stomach. Toga would shout out that despite having been made to float, it wasn't as if Uraraka had managed to hurt any of them. But Uraraka was all too aware of this fact. To her, it was because zero gravity wasn't meant for hurting people. This enraged Toga as she thought back to Uraraka's words to her during the war, when she admitted that she would never feel happy about dropping a person out of the sky. Uraraka's wound wasn't getting any better. She thought about Toga's mention of ego. As she shot out her grappling line, she admitted that perhaps that was true. But even still, when she sees Toga's face, she can't help but wonder what happened for her to turn out like this. She'd say that on the day that changed everything, when they faced each other during the first war, she was sure that something must have happened to make Toga look as sad as she did. Toga paused for a moment before angrily exclaiming that it was Uraraka's fault. Uraraka agreed, but was certain that there has to be more to it. As something strange began to happen to her quirk-powered hand, she demanded that Toga listen to her. When they first met, she couldn't help but be afraid, and this was because she simply didn't understand the person in front of her. She frantically wondered how a person could possibly smile so genuinely in the middle of such a fight. Toga's frustration was only mounting further as she told the girl to shut up. At the same time, she would think of Twice's response to her after she declared her intentions to remain true to herself as Himiko Toga. He'd tell her that if she's going to live as herself, then she'd better be sure to kill as many people as she wants so she can become whoever she likes. Which is just about the craziest advice possible. Seeing these characters painted in a sympathetic light one moment and then given stuff like this is just really funny to me. End of the day though, it's all just fiction, so it doesn't matter all too much how morally just a character may be. Twice's perspective, albeit unhinged, was one that Toga had never received in her entire life, and she truly loved Jin for it. In the present, she began to cry and wondered why Uraraka wouldn't just die already. As she somehow forced her way through a sea of clones, Uraraka responded that she'd already pushed Toga away once before, and she knew all too well that this wasn't Toga's ideal world. As she provided some crazy expressions, Uraraka again considered Toga's ego comment. She knew the reality, but even still, she thought back to the childhood moment that made her so thoroughly appreciate heroism and the smiles that heroes are able to put on the faces of others. Something that even as a snot-nosed little girl, she'd seen plenty of. We would then see the symbolic depiction of her innocence turn around to face that of Toga's. This is all too similar to what we've seen between Deku and Tenko. From seeing all the pain, turmoil, secrecy, and responsibility that Deku burdened himself with all alone, Uraraka knew that a person should never try to hide their true feelings or their face. Shedding tears for her enemy, Uraraka let it be known that Toga has such a lovely smile, one that even she envies. These words struck the villain harder than any blow. Tears raced from Toga's eyes as she recalled the painful words others had shared with her in regards to that very same smile. As Uraraka extended a bloody hand to the heavens, she proclaimed that she won't pretend that she didn't see Toga smile. With this, several particles of power began to spread across the field. With her hand extended, several lightning channels connected the various globs of power. And with one calamitous use of float, Uraraka expelled the entirety of the citywide and mountain-high horde of clones in one fell swoop. Everyone was floating, all without Uraraka ever having touched them. Jiro wondered how such a thing could ever even be possible. The news reporter witnessed the entire event. A single girl had just changed the fate of the world. Toga was crying endlessly now. Uraraka could not pretend that the girl in front of her did not commit crimes. She also would never validate them. But if Toga still felt like talking to her, even if only for just a little bit, then she was willing to give her her blood for the rest of her life. Extending a hand, she wanted the two of them to talk about romance. And now, affectionately referred to her as Himiko-chan. The little version of Uraraka now extended her arm to a crying Toga. Oh my lord, what a chapter! I've got to revise and reconsider the Uraraka portion of an upcoming video now, because oh me, oh my, is this a groundbreaking, world-shaking feat. Like we've been saying for weeks now, the only way the heroes make it out of this one is with Uraraka suddenly coming through with some broken quirk awakening. But listen, this is really outlandish. This is probably the craziest and by far the most drastic quirk awakening in the entire series. We went from Uraraka needing to touch someone directly, having nausea issues, and having a weight limit of 3 tons, to now, where her range, even without touching anything at all, is massive and omnidirectional. She's able to operate just as well as she could before doing so, and the upper weight limit is virtually incalculable. I do think it is really cool, but man, it is so sudden, so drastic, and conveniently everything they needed to finish things off in one go. so I'd be lying if I said I totally love it. But you can totally leave us all your thoughts on this stuff in the comments. You guys have been really opinionated about this battle, so now that it's effectively over, I can't wait to hear what you guys think. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.